In the long history of the galaxy, few tyrants were more feared than the Dark Lords of the Sith, the unrivaled masters of the dark side of the Force. Many Dark Lords rose and fell over the millennia, from the rulers of the various Sith empires to the puppet masters of Darth Bane's lineage. But some Dark Lords were greater than others. Some nearly conquered all the galaxy, while others were failures by Sith standards, surpassed by their apprentices. In this video, we'll be ranking all the Legends Dark Lords of the Sith, from the Pretenders and Heretics to the greatest avatars of the dark side. First things first, let's cover a few ground rules. For this video, we're only going to be covering those Sith who were the rulers of the Sith in their time. For most of Sith history, this was a single individual with the title of Dark Lord of the Sith. For those periods where there were multiple Dark Lords at once, we're instead going to be going with the highest ranking of the bunch. For instance, the Sith Emperor of the true Sith Empire. We're going to be ranking these Sith according to the standard tier list format, which we're sure you're familiar with by now. We'll be ranking them from an explicitly Sith perspective. In other words, the best would be what a Sith would consider to be the best of their order, and vice versa for the worst. With that out of the way, let's begin. We're going to start at the very bottom, with the Pretenders and Heretics, those so-called Dark Lords that, in one way or another, were unworthy of the title to begin with. At the very bottom of the pile, we have Darth Krayt, founder and ruler of the One Sith, who was considered a pretender to the title of Dark Lord by virtually every ancient Sith spirit he encountered, and for good reason. Darth Krayt, formerly the Jedi Knight Asherad Het, created his own Sith Order, the One Sith, after the death of the original Sith Order and the end of the Yuuzhan Vong War, sometime around 27 ABY. The One Sith briefly ruled a galaxy-spanning Sith Empire from 130 to 138 ABY, but their rule was brief and their order fell apart after it ended, in large part because of the ideology Krayt had built it upon, the Rule of One. This doctrine taught that all Sith were essentially one being, tools of the dark rather than Sith in their own right, and as such, the rule forbade internal competition in favor of absolute obedience to Darth Krayt. The One Sith were rigid and bureaucratic, training their members from childhood like the Jedi had, and theoretically, they were all extensions of Darth Krayt's will. This was a perversion of the most fundamental principles of the Sith, and the One Sith were more of a dark mockery of the Jedi Order than a true Sith Order. Darth Krayt was only ever a pretender to the title of Dark Lord, and from a Sith perspective, whatever he achieved in his reign was worthless as a consequence of the One Sith's rotten ideological foundations. The same is true of Dark Lord Scare Khan, the founder and de facto leader of the Brotherhood of Darkness. Khan was originally a Jedi Master sent to battle the Sith in the New Sith Wars, but in 1010 BBY he fell to the dark side and proclaimed himself Dark Lord of the Sith. At the time, there were dozens of Sith who had similar claims, all fighting for the right to rule, and Khan set out to unite them under the banner of the Brotherhood of Darkness. He did this by recognizing all claimants as Dark Lords and pledging that they would all be equal within his Brotherhood. Before long, Khan had consolidated all the Sith under his banner. But he had done this through ideological compromise. Like Darth Krayt, he had stifled the competition fundamental to the Sith and enforced a doctrine of equality. He himself was only a de facto first among equals, not the explicit ruler of the Brotherhood. Worse, Khan ultimately led the Sith to their doom. His Brotherhood's war against the Jedi and the Republic, the War of Light and Darkness, ended with the complete destruction of the Brotherhood and the near extinction of the Sith in the 7th Battle of Ruusan, circa 1000 BBY. Khan's successor, Darth Bane, saw him as a heretic, a traitor to the ideals of the Sith, and a fool, and he was correct on all three counts. Moving on from the Heretics, we have two more pretenders to fill out the bottom tier. The first was Lumiya, the self-styled Dark Lady of the Sith, who attempted to build a new Sith Order after the death of Darth Sidious. Lumiya had been trained by Darth Vader as an assassin, but with the deaths of all remaining Sith Lords, Lumiya took it upon himself to rebuild the Sith Order. Like Krayt and Khan, Lumiya's understanding of Sith ideology was distorted, but not to the point of heresy. She simply had never been fully trained in the ways of the Sith. Lumiya had the spirit of a Sith, to be sure, and in another time she might have made a true Dark Lord, but she lived through the death of the Sith Order, and while she did her best to rebuild the Sith, she never truly earned the title of Dark Lord on her own. Her role was simply to prepare a more worthy claimant to take the title. Lumiya claimed the title of Dark Lady in 4 ABY and took 3 apprentices before her death in 40 ABY. The Stormtrooper Flint, the former Imperial Guard Carnor Jax, and Jason Solo, who became Darth Caedus. Our last pretender is Ludo Kresh, one of the last Dark Lords of the original Sith Empire. In 5000 BBY, after the death of Dark Lord Marka Ragnos, Ludo Kresh was one of 2 claimants seeking to replace him alongside Naga Sadow. Sadow was granted the title by the Sith Council, but Ludo Kresh privately claimed the title of Dark Lord for himself, and he attempted to usurp rule over the Sith Empire from Sadow. His first attempt, an attack on Sadow's fortress on Kar Delba, ended in disaster, and he was presumed dead afterwards. Shortly thereafter, however, Sadow and his forces left to invade the Republic, and while they were gone, Ludo Kresh took over the Sith Empire's core territories and home fleet. When Sadow fled back to Korriban in defeat, Kresh's forces were waiting for them, and the fleets of the 2 Dark Lords tore each other to pieces. Ludo Kresh was killed in the fighting, however, and the weakened Sith Empire was promptly destroyed by the Republic. Like Lumiya, Ludo Kresh was never a true Dark Lord of the Sith, and in the end, all he really did was fatally weaken the Sith Empire. Next up, we're going to have a brief lightning round of Sith that we don't have enough information on to properly judge. These include the Dark Underlord, an enigmatic Sith spirit who became Dark Lord early in the New Sith Wars, Darth Riven, another New Sith Wars era Dark Lord who assembled an army led by alchemically protected Sith battle lords, but who seems to have done nothing else apart from scheme in his fortress on Almas, Darth Desolus, the last Dark Lord of the Old Sith, who waged war on the Republic circa 3500 BBY, Darth Voron, who reigned as Sith Emperor of the true Sith Empire from 3629 BBY onwards, and Darth Cognos, former apprentice of Darth Zana, a Dark Lord of Darth Bane's Order of the Sith Lords. Now it's time to move on to the noteworthy and non-pretender Dark Lords of the Sith, beginning with the C-tier Dark Lords, all of whom were worthy of the titles, but failures in one way or another. At the bottom of this pile, we have Darth Caedus, formerly Jason Solo, the last Dark Lord of Lumiya's Sith. Caedus fell to the dark side due to a mix of trauma from the Yuuzhan Vong War and a misguided desire to restore stability to the galaxy, and after becoming Dark Lord in 40 ABY, he seized control of the Galactic Alliance and attempted to centralize its rule over the galaxy. This led to the Second Galactic Civil War, in which Caedus committed several atrocities before finally being slain by his own sister, the Jedi Knight Jaina Solo, in 41 ABY. Caedus had potential, and for a brief time he had control of the galaxy, but he was misguided from the beginning, his reign was short, and he ultimately accomplished nothing. Next, we have Darth Asina, who replaced Darth Vitiate as the Sith Emperor of the true Sith Empire in 3636 BBY. She ruled over the Sith Empire during its conflicts with the Eternal Empire of Zakul, ultimately agreeing to join forces with the Galactic Republic against the Eternal Empire. As part of the Eternal Alliance, Asina and her Sith helped destroy the Eternal Empire, and soon afterwards, Asina was involved in a struggle over a collection of ancient superweapons housed on Iokath. She attempted to assume control of the weapons, only to be killed in the attempt. Darth Asina's reign lasted a mere 7 years, and though she was able to free the Sith Empire from submission to the Eternal Empire, she did so by joining forces with the Jedi and the Republic, a notably un-Sithy thing to do. Ultimately, the Sith Empire wasn't much better off at the end of Asina's reign than it was at the start. Next up, we have Darth Tenebrous, the Sith Master of Darth Plagueis. Tenebrous had a unique take on the Sith Grand Plan, believing that supercomputers and future-predicting technology could make the Jedi obsolete, leading to the slow withering and eventual extinction of their order, rather than forcing the Sith to actively topple him. His apprentice, Darth Plagueis, disagreed, and he ultimately betrayed and murdered his master in 67 BBY. Tenebrous ultimately accomplished very little apart from training Plagueis, who would take the Sith Grand Plan in a completely different direction. Next up, we have Freedon Nad, who usurped the title of Dark Lord of the Sith in 4400 BBY. Once a promising Jedi, Nad's pride and lust for power drove him to the dark side, leading him to seek out the supposedly extinct Sith and train under Naga Sadow. After learning everything Sadow could teach him, Nad killed his master and usurped the title of Dark Lord. From there, Nad used his power to conquer the planet Onderon, setting himself up as its king. He ruled for decades with an iron fist, and while he was eventually killed by the Jedi, his dark spirit manipulated his descendants for centuries, and he ultimately played a vital role in orchestrating the start of the Great Sith War. He took the fallen Jedi Exar Kun as his last apprentice, only for Kun to betray him and destroy his spirit. Freedon Nad was one of the most powerful Dark Lords of the Sith, but all he used that power for was to conquer and rule over a single backwater planet. At the top of this tier, we have Marka Ragnos, the second to last Dark Lord of the original Sith Empire. Reigning from 5100 to 5000 BBY, Ragnos was renowned for his skill at manipulation, which he used to destroy enemies and potential threats before they became a problem. He ruled the Sith Empire with an iron fist, and thanks to his elimination of troublemakers, his rule ushered in an unprecedented era of stability and prosperity known as the Golden Age of the Sith. But Ragnos' reign also led to stagnation, and his suppression of dissent directly led to the conflict between Naga Sadow and Ludo Kresh after his death. The conflict destroyed the Sith Empire, undoing everything Ragnos had built within just a few years after his death. In his time, Marka Ragnos was an effective leader, but his rule ultimately doomed the Sith Empire. Moving on to B tier, we have those Dark Lords of the Sith that did well in their time, but didn't achieve as much as they could have. At the bottom of this tier, we have Belia Dazu, a new Sith Wars era Dark Lord of the Sith. Ruling from 1250 to 1230 BBY, Dazu led the Sith during the Sictus Wars, and her greatest achievement was the creation of a dark side virus that transformed all living beings it came into contact with into techno-beasts, terrifying cybernetic dark side monsters. Belia Dazu unleashed chaos and terror upon the galaxy from her fortress on Tython, severely weakening the ailing Republic and killing many Jedi, but her reign was cut short by an assassination plot. Just above Dazu, we have Darth Ruin, the founder of the new Sith. Ruin gathered the scattered remnants of the old Sith and united them under his banner, openly declaring himself in 2000 BBY. He caused a schism within the Jedi Order and unleashed a millennium of war upon the galaxy, making him one of the most destructive and historically significant Dark Lords. But Ruin didn't live to see most of his achievements, and that was his own fault. Darth Ruin, you see, had a unique take on Sith ideology. He was a solipsist, believing that he was the only person that was actually real, and this belief blossomed into open egomania. Ruin was so utterly egotistical that his own apprentices found him insufferable, and they ultimately teamed up to kill him for it. Above Ruin, we have Darth Plagueis, the not-so-wise. Plagueis reigned as Dark Lord of the Sith from 67 to 32 BBY, and like with his master, his greatest achievement was just training Darth Sidious to replace him. But Plagueis gets a spot above Tenebrous, for he played an important role in orchestrating the ultimate victory of the Sith. Plagueis didn't just train Sidious, he laid the foundations for the Clone Wars, helped propel Sidious to the Supreme Chancellorship, and manipulated the Jedi Masters Dooku and Sifo Dyas into becoming unwitting Sith pawns. However, Plagueis' accomplishments were undermined somewhat by the fact that a lot of what he thought were his plans had been subconsciously fed to him by Sidious, and by the fact that Plagueis wasted most of his life chasing immortality and attempting to control midichlorians, a line of research that ultimately went nowhere. Next, we have the very first Dark Lord of the Sith, the founder of the Sith Order and first ruler of the Sith Empire, Ajunta Pall. Ajunta Pall was a fallen Jedi, and he became the leader of a Dark Jedi sect during the 100-Year Darkness, which lasted from 7000 to 6900 BBY. He was one of only 12 Dark Jedi to survive that war's end, and he and the others were banished from known space, only to wind up on Korriban. There, Pall and his followers enslaved the Sith species, becoming the Lords of the Sith and founding the Sith Empire. Ajunta Pall, the strongest of the bunch, became the ruler of this new empire. Pall and his disciples blended the teachings and techniques of the Sith species with their own Dark Jedi practices to create Sith ideology, which Ajunta Pall codified. Ajunta Pall created the Sith, and he was one of the most powerful and feared Sith Lords of all time, ruling the Sith Empire for decades with an iron fist. But Pall and his disciples also fought one another regularly, and they ultimately destroyed themselves in a battle on Korriban, setting the precedent for millennia of Sith self-destructiveness. After his death, Pall repented of his crimes, and his spirit ultimately returned to the light side. Ultimately, while Ajunta Pall may have been the first Dark Lord of the Sith, he was far from the greatest Dark Lord of the Sith. Instead, you might say he was the baseline that all future Dark Lords tried to surpass. At the top of B tier, we have Darth Malak, who ruled as Dark Lord of his and Darth Revan's Sith Empire from 3957 to 3956 BBY. Once a Jedi Knight, Malak had followed his close friend Revan down the path of the dark side during the Mandalorian Wars, ultimately becoming Revan's Sith apprentice and the second in command of a new Sith Empire. 2 years into their war against the Republic, Malak betrayed Revan when a Jedi strike team boarded his flagship, usurping the title of Dark Lord of the Sith. With Revan apparently dead, Malak took control of the Sith Empire and set out to utterly destroy the Republic. He nearly succeeded. By the end of the Jedi Civil War in 3956 BBY, the Republic was on the verge of collapse, and Malak's armada was preparing to launch an invasion of the core worlds. But Malak was killed by Revan, who had survived and returned to the light on the eve of his victory, and the Sith Empire completely imploded soon afterwards. Darth Malak was incredibly powerful and a great conqueror, honored by future generations of Sith, but he loses a few points for his complete lack of subtlety. While Revan was a strategic genius and had a complex plan for converting the Republic into a Sith Empire, Malak was not. He used overwhelming brute force to destroy everything in his path, and as a consequence, he left the galaxy in ruins. More importantly, from a Sith perspective, Malak encouraged a similar attitude among his disciples, creating a Sith order that was fractious, weak, and full of undisciplined hooligans. This led to the civil war that destroyed the Sith after Malak's death, undoing everything he had built. Next up, we have the A-tier Dark Lords, the great and terrible champions of the Sith Order. At the very bottom, we have a Dark Lord you probably expected to be a little higher, Darth Vitiate, also known as Tenebrae, the original Sith Emperor of the true Sith Empire. Tenebrae rebuilt the Sith Empire after its destruction by the Republic following the Great Hyperspace War, re-establishing it on Dromund Kaas and spreading it to numerous worlds in the unknown regions. His true Sith Empire stayed secret, slowly rebuilding and preparing for its revenge on the Republic for over 1,000 years. In the 3600s BBY, the true Sith made their move, conquering half the known galaxy in the Great Galactic War. All the while, Tenebrae became unfathomably powerful. He was among the most powerful Sith to ever live, thanks to arcane rituals that he used to consume the life forces of others on a mass scale. This made him functionally immortal, and it was only the beginning of Tenebrae's true plan, to consume all life in the galaxy, and then in the whole universe. But this plan was repeatedly foiled, and Tenebrae ultimately abandoned the Sith in favor of the Eternal Empire, with which he also failed to conquer the galaxy. Tenebrae's spirit was ultimately destroyed for good after the fall of the Eternal Empire, and the true Sith Empire had, by that point, long since passed to Darth Asina. Tenebrae was incredibly powerful, and his Sith Empire achieved so much, conquering more than any other Sith Empire in history. However, Tenebrae loses out a bit in the ranking for the simple reason that he later betrayed the Sith, undid much of what he had done for his empire, and then brought about his own destruction. Still, his reign is impressive, which is why we haven't ranked him any lower. Above Tenebrae, we have Darth Traya, who took control of the remnants of Revan and Malak's empire in 3955 BBY. Traya founded the Sith Triumvirate, consisting of herself and her two apprentices, Darth Nihilus and Darth Sion, with whom she attempted to destroy the Jedi Order. Traya insisted that the Sith remnants destabilize the Republic and the Jedi Order from the shadows, but Nihilus and Sion eventually grew impatient and overthrew her. Traya reclaimed rule of the Sith remnants in 3951 BBY, but she was killed by Mitra Surik soon after, and by that point, she had ceased to truly be a Sith anyway. Darth Traya gets a high ranking for the simple reason that she came closer than any Dark Lord in history to wiping out the Jedi Order. That was all she really accomplished, but from the perspective of the Sith, that was also all that really mattered. Above Traya, we have Naga Sadow, the last true Dark Lord of the original Sith Empire. Sadow succeeded Marka Ragnos in 5000 BBY, and he led the Sith in their very first war against the Republic, the Great Hyperspace War. In this war, Sadow personally led a devastating invasion of the Core Worlds, in which his forces nearly succeeded in taking Coruscant before being driven back. Sadow was ultimately defeated thanks to the betrayals of his apprentice, Gav Daragon, and his rival, Ludo Kresh, leading to the fall of the Sith Empire, but Sadow survived, hiding out on Yavin 4 for centuries. He was ultimately killed by Freeden Nad, his last apprentice, in 4400 BBY. In his lifetime, Naga Sadow didn't really accomplish much, but he played a hugely important role in the history of the Sith. He gave the Sith their dream of toppling the Republic and conquering the galaxy. Without Sadow, the Sith would have descended into complacency and stagnation, and their teachings may well have been diluted into meaninglessness before they could ever challenge the Republic. All the great Sith Lords that came after Sadow owed much to his legacy. Above Sadow, we have Tulak Hord, the greatest Dark Lord of the old Sith Empire. Hord was the greatest lightsaber duelist of the ancient Sith, a true master of the dark side and an accomplished conqueror, responsible for bringing more than 100 planets into the Sith Empire. Hord was ultimately betrayed and killed by an apprentice of his, but his reign nonetheless brought the Sith Empire to its height, setting the stage for the golden age of the Sith. At the top of the A tier, we have Darth Zannah, the apprentice of Darth Bane. Little is known about Zannah's reign as Dark Lord, but her role in the history of the Sith was so important that it merits a high ranking on its own. Darth Bane formulated the Rule of Two, kicked off the Sith Grand Plan, and founded the Order of the Sith Lords, but none of it would have mattered if it weren't for Darth Zannah. Bane was just one man, and one who died long before any of what he planned actually came to fruition. For anything he ever did to matter, he needed a successor that maintained what he built despite whatever disagreements they had, setting precedents that ensured that the Baneite Sith would endure. Darth Zana did exactly that. Despite turning against her master in the end, she maintained what he had built, even when she was led to believe that he was straying from the path he himself had set. Darth Bane may have come up with the rule of two, but by killing him, taking his place, and maintaining his ways, Darth Zana was the one who truly implemented it, and in doing so, she set the stage for the eventual victory of the Sith. And with that, we come to S tier, the greatest of the Dark Lords of the Sith, the avatars of the dark side. There are 4 Sith Lords that we've ranked above all the others, and in 4th place, we have Darth Revan. Revan had once been a Jedi, but like with his soon-to-be Sith apprentice Malak, he was corrupted to the dark side during the Mandalorian Wars. Revan set out to transform the Republic into a Sith Empire so that it could stand in opposition to the true Sith, and his plan initially went quite well. After claiming the title of Dark Lord and starting his war against the Republic in 3959 BBY, Revan won battle after battle, conquering a third of the known galaxy. More impressively, he did so through complex strategies that kept the Republic's industry and infrastructure intact, allowing it to serve the Sith. In this manner, Revan would have conquered the galaxy without nearly as much of the infrastructure damage conquest usually causes, theoretically resulting in a strong, galaxy-spanning Sith Empire that just might have been able to fend off the true Sith. But in 3957 BBY, Revan was betrayed by Malak and captured by the Jedi, who brainwashed him and ultimately brought him back to the light. Revan ultimately cast down his own Sith Empire, and he spent the rest of his life trying to stop the true Sith in other ways. The Sith revered Revan for his achievements, his power, and for how close he brought them to victory, but Revan gets knocked down a bit on this ranking for his ultimate redemption. In 3rd place, we have Exar Kun, the Dark Lord who unleashed the Great Sith War upon the galaxy. Reigning from 3997 to 3996 BBY, Exar Kun was a fallen Jedi who was corrupted by the dark spirit of Frida Nad. In record time, Kun learned the ways of the Sith, mastering various techniques he'd learned from Nad and the writings of Naga Sadow. Exar Kun became extraordinarily powerful in the dark side, such that the very ground trembled beneath his feet, and that all but the strongest wills crumbled before his gaze. Kun sought to begin a new golden age of the Sith, and to that end, he unleashed the Great Sith War of 3996 BBY. A galaxy-spanning campaign of terror and destruction that laid waste to the Republic and crippled the Jedi Order. Exar Kun was ultimately cornered in his stronghold on Yavin 4 and defeated, but he made the galaxy tremble before he did, setting the stage for the rest of the old Sith Wars. In the number 2 spot, we have Darth Sidious, the last true Dark Lord of the Sith. Sidious needs no introduction. He orchestrated the Clone Wars, the fall of the Republic, the rise of the Empire, and the complete destruction of the Jedi Order. In all but wiping out the hated enemies of the Sith and becoming Galactic Emperor, Sidious made the long-awaited revenge of the Sith a reality. Under Sidious, for the first and only time, the Sith reigned supreme and unchallenged over the galaxy, albeit through the intermediary of a secular galactic empire. Darth Sidious led the Sith to victory, but in the end, he choked and it all came crashing down. Sidious's own hubris led to his defeat and first death in the Battle of Endor, fracturing the Empire and paving the way for the rise of the New Republic. Sidious returned in a clone body several years later, gathering his forces at Biss and beginning 2 years of terror campaigns across the galaxy, but by that point, he had become psychologically unstable and his monomania proved his own undoing. In the end, Darth Sidious's spirit was dragged down to chaos by the Jedi and his Dark Empire was defeated. Darth Sidious was responsible for the Sith's greatest achievements, but he was also the reason they didn't last, which is why he's only number 2 on this list. And lastly, in the very top spot, we have Darth Bane. Darth Bane was the Sith Ari, the prophesized perfect Sith. He trained under the Brotherhood of Darkness, but he came to despise their heresy, arranged for their destruction, and founded his own Sith Order. Bane became Dark Lord of the Sith in 1000 BBY, and he ruled the Order of the Sith Lords for the next 20 years before he was killed and replaced by Darth Xana. Darth Bane corrected the flaws of the new Sith, implementing the Rule of Two and beginning the Sith Grand Plan. He laid the groundwork for Darth Sidious's eventual triumph, setting the Sith on the path to victory. But most importantly, Darth Bane did something no other Sith was able to do. He made the Sith stable, allowing his order to work long enough to actually win. Darth Bane, more than any other Sith, truly understood the dark side and the Sith teachings, understood the successes and failures of previous Sith, and understood what it would take for the Sith to actually be stable without making ideological compromises. The Rule of Two. Darth Bane was the ultimate Dark Lord of the Sith, indirectly responsible for all the victories that came after him. So, that was our ranking of the Dark Lords of the Sith. But what do you think? Do you disagree with any of our placements? And if so, why? Let us know down in the comments section below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.